I was 37, so I'm a late diagnosis. Basically in the process of dying, so so I was just in survival mode at the start. There's something called diabetic ketoacidosis, which is a common trigger at the start when people are diagnosed. And I was deep into it. I lost 30 pounds in about a week and a half. And so my body was shutting down. So survival mode was, there wasn't a lot of thinking involved. It was more of like a constant panic. But afterwards, I'm a bit obsessive about research and studies. And so I looked into everything I could when it came to diabetes. And so that's how I deal with problems. I hunker down and learn as much as I can so I can dissect them and then come up with any possible solutions. So I went from survival mode to, all right, plan and take action. What can I do to work and live with this? Well, yesterday was a rough day, and so as far as blood sugar levels were concerned, so it was a primary example of why I need to control them. I think the best description is glitchy vision when things go high and when I fluctuate, and because you can go blind either temporarily or permanently with intense fluctuations in blood sugars. And I was really high for no reason yesterday, and my vision got blurry, and I got glitchy vision, which is I had a hard time focusing. And also, I would like to live a long and healthy life, and I have children, and I have goals and passions, and so controlling my blood sugar on the daily and over time in aggregate will prevent some of the complications that come from diabetes that can prevent me from doing things that I'd really like to do. So the number is hard to tell because it's on my watch, and so I'm working. All right, so I'm working with students, and I get distracted from time to time, and I have insulin on board. So there's insulin in my body that oftentimes I'll take a shot in class of insulin because I use multiple daily injections, and so I'm checking constantly. It's a habit. I'll be talking in the conversation. I check twice while we're doing this, and it's just a flip of the wrist that pops up on my watch, and then I go back to what I'm doing. Mainly because, again, I'm it's not obsessive, but maybe a little bit about controlling it. So knowing where I'm at, where I'm going, how much insulin's on board, and what I've eaten is the best way for me to control things. Lows, I get tired and I don't feel great, but it doesn't really change my mood all that much. Highs make me irritable, short-tempered. So that's probably the hardest part for me, as far as like the part that's like psychologically depressing and difficult to deal with, is trying to figure out how to cope with diabetic blood sugars and physical activity. I'm a mountain climber, I'm a hiker, and I basically stopped doing those things for a short period of time, well, for a year and a half, until I could figure out, and I still really haven't returned. My goal is to climb Mount Rainier. I was working on it and training it when I was diagnosed. And I have severe drops and lows when I exercise. I'm really sensitive. It's one of the most, probably the most effective way, fastest way for me to drop blood sugars if I'm high, is to exercise. And that's pretty common, but I'm really sensitive to it. So it makes it very difficult to do physical activity. I can do short bursts and weight training, but anything involving hiking, long-term aerobic exercise, I still haven't figured out. I'm 2 years in. I'm hoping to soon, though. So when you guys came in earlier, I was talking about how yesterday was a rough day. So it included a high throughout the day, which I was chasing with insulin all day, which led to, for whatever reason, in the middle of the night at 2 o'clock, and then at 3 o'clock, and then at 4:30, I was woken up by alarms. And so repeatedly I was woken up, and I'm tired today as a result. But so I don't sleep enough. It's a blessing when I do sleep throughout the night. Because it's either my diabetes waking me up or my kids. I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, so. So it depends on the day. Some days, like today's been an awesome day, and so today I'll just turn my alarms off because I have not, as long as things go steady throughout the rest of the evening, I know how much insulin's on board, and I know, which means how much I have in my body that I've injected at the start of the day. There's two types, there's long and short acting. I took a certain amount of long acting this morning. And as long as I don't do a bunch of short acting near the end of the day, and I'm at a good number, I can turn my alarms off overnight currently, and I haven't had any problems with that. And so tonight I'll probably will turn it off, and so it won't wake me up. If yesterday it was 3 times because I was chasing it all day. So my typical insulin load was higher yesterday than normal, and that usually does weird stuff for me as far as like blood sugars in the evenings. And so I definitely turn the alarms on because I gotta be safe. So I woke up at 52 in the middle of in the middle of the night. I'm like, it's not a good number to wake up to. It makes you feel kind of crummy. So it fluctuates. So I use what's called basal insulin. So it's a glargine. It's a long acting, which is 14 units is what I take at the start when I wake up. And then I usually take somewhere between 10 and 22 of fast acting, depending on what I'm eating and my activity for the day. If I'm very active at work, I don't tend to take as much because I'm moving the whole time. So I'm just burning through any carbohydrates that I've consumed. And so on a typical day at work, it's usually about 14 units a day. So I think I'm on the lower end as far as what people take in the day, but I'm not entirely sure. I'm aware, yeah, there's in the community. So again, I'm fairly new to diabetes, but as soon as I was diagnosed, I jumped into the communities on Reddit and on Instagram and Facebook, and it's a conversation all the time. I listen to the Beta Cell podcast, which goes through prices and talk about, okay, it was something like, hey, $6 a vial, and like, okay, well, a vial's $300 to purchase. So like the disparity between the pricing, the production, and the cost is huge. And so it's obviously a concern for people who don't have jobs or healthcare. When I go out to eat, I'm fairly restrictive. So I don't tend to just kind of wing it ever. Again, I'm a student of it, and I'm very disciplined. And so when I go out to eat, I look at the menu, identify things that I can and cannot eat. I have an extra complication because I have something called eosinophilic esophagitis, which is, I just got diagnosed like 3 weeks ago, or 6 weeks ago now. I'm allergic to gluten and tree nuts and soy and a little bit to eggs. So like there's a lot of things I can't eat. So I have to be restrictive. And the complicated part is you get to a restaurant and you're like, okay, is it busy? I look around, see how busy the restaurant is. If it's not busy, I go, my meal can be out here in about 30 minutes. So then I'll pick a food, I'll immediately take my insulin in preparing for the food, and then hope that it shows up by the time the insulin starts. If it doesn't, I always have a giant snack bag with me, and then I just nibble until the food arrives. So mostly I deal with it by being restrictive and just not eating a lot of the carbohydrates. At first, it was very difficult. I took a week off of work. I was trying to figure out, we were in COVID at that point in time. So I just immediately took a week off. I've also taken a lot more sick days than I've ever taken in my entire life, just because I have to. And so that's a thing you just got to accept, that I'm going to have complications outside of the norm. Like when I got COVID, for example. I got COVID in October, and I didn't get that sick, but it changed my blood sugar profile like dramatically for about 3 months. And so I had to be much more careful about monitoring it. So at work, I still can do my job perfectly well. I don't have any concerns about that. I wear a monitor, and so I'm always checking. Though I freaked out my students a few times. One time we were taking a test in class, and my alarm was on, and I don't usually have it on during the day, during the work time. And it just went off because I was at 185 or whatever. And I was like, I wasn't even paying attention. I was working with a kid, helping somebody out, and then it went, Mom! And like my whole class is like, what is happening? So it's changed a little bit as far as that's concerned, but really I don't feel like it's changed or it's prevented me from doing any of my work stuff. I feel like I'm just as effective as before. So the only thing I've done to change is every once in a while I have to like stop. And I have to be comfortable with the fact that like, right now I'm not able to teach for like the next 3 minutes. Because a few times I've been teaching and I get distracted. And I usually check quite frequently, but before I had a watch and before I had a Dexcom, a few times I dropped low, and I didn't know it until it started to happen. So I was instructing, I was talking to my class, and then my hand started to shake, and I was like, and I feel cold, and I was like, so I'm in the middle of conversation with my students. I'm teaching about something, and I pull out my monitor, I stab myself, I check my blood, and I'm like, you're at 48 or whatever it is. I'm like, okay, everybody, at this point in time, please open to page 25 while I pass out. No, I was in the process of instructing. I had to stop the class and let them go on to do something else while I recovered, because I was actually in a minor medical emergency. So that would be the only thing I'd say that actually changes, being okay with the fact that, hey, at some point in time, I do need to take care of myself. If you know a type 1 is just to be supportive, to ask questions. Many of the type 1s I know is they do like to explain and have other people informed about the disease, so that, hey, then they become somewhat part of the network. Dealing with this disease, the best thing that I've done, I feel like, for my own well-being is creating a team of, there's doctors and there's nutritionists and there's my family and there's my friends. They're all aware of my condition, and I appreciate that. It makes me feel more comfortable. So if I'm going to educate anybody, it's just to say, hey, it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to be curious, because it's different. And if you are curious and you ask questions, then you can be a part of what kind of protects or takes care of the group of us that are type 1s. Something that I want people to know, maybe connected to that last answer, is some people are very uncomfortable or insecure about their type 1s, and for good reason. It's a very difficult at times disease to deal with, and that, hey, be sensitive when you approach somebody, and be respectful when you approach somebody who's a type 1, or if you see somebody who's treating themselves for a medical condition in public, just try not to judge. Ask questions and be respectful is the best way to go about it, without creating animosity or problems, or making that person's day worse. Like a common thing that people complain about is when somebody says, what, you can eat that? Are you going to eat that? It's like, it doesn't bother me much, but I definitely can see why it would bother somebody. It's like, hey, don't judge somebody's decisions, because being a type 1 and taking care of your this disease is complex. Is be respectful, and it's okay to be curious and ask questions, and to care, and also perhaps be patient with us sometimes. If I seem out of character, if you see somebody who's a type 1, you know somebody who's a type 1, and they're having a rough day, or they seem a little more agitated than usual, just consider that it might be a little bit outside of their control at that moment. Because myself, I'm usually a pretty happy, positive person, but something weird has happened in the last couple of years where, when I do get high and my blood sugars are out of control, I become very irritable, and it's like, I feel bad about it. And so if I can just have people be really understanding, that'd be huge.